Good morning. In today's In Conversation, we have an opportunity on this rather cold day to have a warm conversation with one of our most engaged Farnham residents, Alan Gavaghan. Alan will give us an insight into his role as chairman of the Farnham Society. This conversation with Richard will be the second in our In Conversation series and will discuss Farnham's successes and challenges. Richard will cover the fundamental questions of the day: what, why, and who we represent. Over to you, Richard.
Michelle, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. And without any more to do, Alan, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Richard. Yes, I'm very well. I'm sitting here warm. My feet are very warm and comfortable, so I'm ready.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear that. As Michelle says, we meet on a pretty cold, wintry day. Now, as she said, I think, we've got an opportunity of talking in some depth about the Farnham Society. But I thought I'd start slightly differently about your good self, because in my experience, Farnham is a place where we have people who are long-term residents. Indeed, my wife has lived here pretty much all her life, and that's not uncommon, mixed with some new people coming in, as we know. And the first conversation with Sylvia at the Blue Bear Bookshop was indeed with somebody who's recently arrived. So I thought I'd start with you, sir. Are you a long-term resident of Farnham?
Well, yes, I suppose you could say that. I've been here since 1988. But I do recall that the first time I saw Farnham, in fact, I wasn't aiming to come to Farnham. At that time, I was very keen on cycling, and I hoped in my innocent youth to become one of the top racing cyclists of the United Kingdom. Never made it.
Really? Wow.
Well, that was in my mind at the time, but I never quite got there. But a part of my training routine was to go on to long trips, and one of them, I was living in London, was to pick out on a map some interesting places. And I'm sorry to say it wasn't Farnham that attracted me. It was the Hog's Back and the Devil's Punch Bowl. Both of those seemed to be quite interesting places to visit. So I duly got on my bike and came out. But of course, I did, en route, come to Farnham. And it must have been market day. I was only about 17, 18 at the time. It must have been market day, because I remember the cattle being driven into the cattle pens in South Street, where Sainsbury's is now.
That's right.
And I formed a conclusion: what a lovely place. The tempo of life seemed different to London. The people I spoke to seemed very pleasant. But then, of course, I jumped on my bike and rode off, and then pursued my life. I then went off national service in the Royal Air Force and air traffic control. And then I went back into the civilian world and ended up in a very large international Lloyd's broking organization. And I spent the rest of my life going around, first of all, the UK, and then traveling quite extensively abroad. So I came back here in 1988. So I've been here 30 odd years.
So what triggered your interest in well, not your interest, but what triggered that ultimate move to Farnham? Was it a future escape to the country, or how did you see it then?
Filthy money. I was offered a position in London, which was very attractive. So I moved down from Warwickshire with my family and started looking around, and it triggered memories of Farnham. My wife and I immediately fell for it again. And my wife made it clear she got fed up with traveling around all over the place with me. So we settled, and we've never regretted a day since.
No, well, 1988, you hear about places like Cornwall, and, unless you were actually there before you were born, you can't claim to be Cornish. I'm not sure how that applies to Farnham, but 1988, a different time, wasn't it? But, when I was looking at some things that we might cover, I saw that in December 2019, I don't know whether you saw this, that Farnham was voted on the happiest index. Let me look at my note here. Yes, the happiest index, the fourth happiest place to live in Surrey. I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it? Apart from the fact there are three above us, but fourth, not bad.
Extremely good.
Well, I've got some bad news as well, because if you widen it to the southeast, it's actually 14 out of 27. So we've got a little bit way to go, and maybe we'll get into some of the issues that might surround that. So let's move on to the Farnham Society, really the topic of our chat this morning. What, with the 1988 start point in Farnham, what led you to get involved in the Farnham Society?
Well, in 1988, I was still working and commuting to London and travelling away from home quite a bit as well. But I suppose my interest was triggered by press comments. The Farnham Herald is a wonderful source of information and triggers all sorts of thoughts in your mind as you read through, particularly the letters that people write in. And it struck me that the name the Farnham Society kept cropping up as making one or two valid points. So I thought, well, why not just join? And that's really what I did. I just joined. I didn't do anything apart from joining. But then when I retired, I found myself chairman of our local residents association. And that alerted me to some major problems on planning applications. At that time, we were locked into heavy disputes on a land refill site, which was causing all sorts of local problems, from smells to fly infestation. And we took on the owners, basically, as a residents association, and they were backed by the Farnham Society. So that made me interested in the Farnham Society and realised they had a wider picture of everything that was going on in Farnham, because as a local residents association, clearly you're interested in what's going on in your area. But the Farnham Society, much wider, and also depth of knowledge on regulations and government restrictions and planning applications and so on. And in the midst of this, I got a phone call from a friend. I thought it was a joke. He said, "Would you consider becoming chairman of the Farnham Society?" Now, to me, the Farnham Society was...
You called him a friend, did you? Dear me.
Yeah, he had a sense of humour, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, I thought it was a joke, but it obviously wasn't. And at that time, the Farnham Society was having difficulty. There have been some resignations from the committee. So I thought, well, let's go along and see what it's like, because I've been impressed by the support they've given me as a chairman of a residents association. And then I started looking into it, as you do before you accept these things, and looked at the history. And the history fascinated me because I suddenly realized they've been around since 1911.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because it is, that's amazing, isn't it? We're in the 110th year since the founding of the Farnham Society. Although it was refounded, I understand. So it's a long-standing civic amenity society, isn't it?
Yeah, well, 1911 is just another world. They just launched the Titanic, for God's sake. And I think the first flight...
That's not a good analogy. That is not a good analogy, Alan.
We haven't founded yet. We're still going strong, missing all the icebergs. But, they're just flown across the States, East Coast to West Coast. It only took 82 hours flying time. It took over 30 days, because obviously the helicopter stopped and refuel, stop, refuel. So it was a totally different world they were living in, the founders of the Farnham Society. But their principles are the same as now. We have a strap line. You've got to have a strap line nowadays, haven't you? But the strap line, I think, does try to capture, in a few words, what you're trying to do. And the strap line is shaping our future and protecting our heritage. So looking forward and protecting what's good. So
yeah, let's come on to that in a minute. Let's come on to that in a minute, because I think that's a good way of capturing the essence of what we're trying to do. But if you go back to that start point, it was started by some pretty notable personalities in Farnham, wasn't it, at the time? And a place isn't just the built environment, it's also about the people. So, people like William Faulkner, weren't they part of, the founding of the society?
They were. Yeah,
somebody obviously ringing me to disagree, so that'll. Yeah.
It won't be Harold Faulkner, unfortunately, but.
Oh yeah, Harold Faulkner.
He probably had a brother. But
Indeed.
That's what actually made me hesitate going into the chair, because people like Harold Faulkner and Charles Borelli, and Sir John Vintner. I mean, these are very powerful, strong names in the history of Farnham. So that actually reinforced my decision to go in, because these were real, modern parlance, wheeler dealers that were going to make things happen. And you had this combination, if only we could have it now, of Borelli and Faulkner, Borelli being a businessman, local councillor, Faulkner being the architect. Wonderful ideas he had. He was great into preservation. A lot of the fronts of buildings you look at now is because of Faulkner. The actual real buildings behind it. And Borelli, he loved bow windows. There are lots of bow windows around. So, you know, they created Farnham. They did this deal. One, the politician, one effectively almost, I said, a developer, not quite a developer, but that's what he was doing. They changed the shape of Farnham very dramatically. The Lloyd's building, for instance, looking up Castle Street, that was an old Victorian building, very tatty, but Faulkner put a different front on it. Now we accept that as part of Farnham's heritage, which of course it is.
And that's the, you know, protecting the heritage side of that. In terms of what's been achieved by the Society, I mean, it would be easy to put a cynical hat on here and say, well, I hear those grand ambitions, but as I've looked around at Farnham with the Woolmead in the past, with obviously the major developments that are underway and about to be underway, you know, in terms of housing development, etc. In fact, the whole pressure on the southeast. What does it achieve? I'm sure it has achieved a lot, but it's not sort of front of mind. What does it achieve?
Well, it's had a lot of disappointments because we're in a continual battle. Applications pour in every day. There's over 1,000 a year come in, which we have to look at all of them. But if you look back over the past years, go back a fair way even, for my time, but apparently there was a very big push to put a big aggregate depot up near the Cockbridge roundabout on the water meadows there, up towards Bentley. And that was going to be an enormous thing. We managed to stop that. We also managed to keep ourselves out the Western Corridor. This was a government plan, which ultimately we could see would link us to Aldershot. And we didn't think as a market town that was the right way to go. We wanted to keep physical separation rather than be joined into a bigger and bigger conurbation. These are things which go on in the background. People are not aware of it. Consultation documents, we work on those at the government, and things are changed because of our input before the public even become aware of what's happening. Conservation areas, there would be no conservation areas but for the Farnham Society pushing for them. I think there are something like 42 conservation areas in Waverley, and we have 4 of them. You have the town centre, Recklesham, and Waverley Abbey, and I missed one somewhere. Recklesham, of course. Did I mention Recklesham?
Yeah, you mentioned Recklesham.
So these areas we've created out of nothing to protect the good quality stuff which has survived over the years because they are quality buildings, attractive buildings, and they're still being used. So these are the sort of things we do. And then we had working with, which is our daughter company, if I can put it that way, the Farnham Building Preservation Trust. This was set up at the times of the fight for the Maltings. And that was really an organisation which has money, and they bought properties, renovate them, and sell them on, and then use the money as a rolling programme of renovating old buildings. We created that out of our members, and we worked with them very closely, and they fought with us a very hard battle for the Maltings. The Maltings, for instance, would now be a housing site. And what have we got? A wonderful centre of culture and education, a great setup that any city or town would give their hind teeth for. Similarly with the potteries out at Recklesham, that would be a housing estate. Again, Farnham Building Presentation came in with us and our members backing them and bought it, renovated it, sold it on, and now it's a flourishing part of the craft image of Farnham. So,
which, of course, is a new aspect, isn't it? The craft town. Before we get into more detail there, let me just talk about members a moment, because it's obviously a member organisation, and you've referred to it a number of times, saying, you know, with members, we've done this with members. I understand it's quite a large civic society, the Farnham Society, not just having that long history, but actually has quite a scale in the, you know, in the world of civic and amenity societies. What is it, about 600 odd members?
It's 670 odd, I think, at the moment, and it has been growing because COVID has stopped us really with public contact, so that's made things a little more difficult. But yes, we are big. I always reflect on the fact that Guildford, which is twice, three times perhaps the size of Farnham, they have half the numbers that we have. And I think it reflects the real interest of people on Farnham. The quality of life in Farnham is important. It needs protecting.
Yeah. In terms of what we offer members as a member of the Farnham Society, hopefully we can encourage more people to join. But what do you see as what we provide for members? I mean, you've referred to the fact of what we expect from members in terms of support, if I can put it like that. But what's going in the other direction in terms of what we offer members?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, rather like myself, you've suddenly become aware of the fact that the Farnham Society is a very broad church. It's not representing particular pressure groups. It's reflecting what the whole of the membership wants. So what they're getting back, I think, is an organisation which is there 24 hours a day, effectively. It's a bit dramatic, but it is there watching what is going on right through the year. And it has the ability to organise the public to object or resist certain things which are not attractive. And we've demonstrated that many times in the past. So the members, I think, are being fed information all the time. And it's not expensive, for goodness sake. I mean, £12 a year, £1 a month. And you've got somebody watching something which could actually be threatening your home. You wouldn't want a landfill built next to your house. But it goes on. There's a big problem going on at the moment with recycling waste just up the road from us. So all these things, I think, are feeding back to the membership that we're there, we're available for a nominal fee a year.
One of the things that must be difficult to get right, if there is such a thing as right, is balance, because you've referred to and painted a certain picture of we're opposed to this or we're opposed to that. But that won't be everybody's view, will it? You know, there will be a broad range of views across Farnham and across the demographic. And I get some of the recent developments, examples of that. How do we try and balance this so that we are a voice for all residents of Farnham, or is that too big an ambition?
Well, I don't think you can please everybody all the time. You're bound to give offence to some people if you are balancing a picture and really believe that what you're putting forward is reasonable from the overall point of view of Farnham residents. And obviously some people will be inconvenienced. I mean, there is a number of projects which involve road relaying. Well, that is going to impact on certain individuals. And clearly we probably offend people if we say, well, we support that particular idea. But we give an example really with the East Street Brightwells development. I mean, you're probably aware we were very much opposed to that. And now what I'm hearing is as it rears up out of the ground and begins to impact on the skyline of Farnham, a lot of people are waking up to this and saying, oh dear, it doesn't look too good. And of course, so many other things have happened since then, which is going to make it a very difficult structure to make profitable from the ratepayers' point of view, because the ratepayers are very heavily involved in this. So we had objections to that against us, quite hostile comments being made about these fuddy-duddies, want to keep everything in aspect, all that sort of stuff, you know. It's not true. I mean, we encourage proper architecture in the right place. We give awards to architects. We put up plaques to congratulate people on buildings. All these sort of things we try to encourage. Doesn't
that lead me to take you back to that tagline, you know, shaping the future and protecting our heritage? We spent time there looking at protecting the heritage and the challenges involved in that. What about shaping the future? We're not saying, are we, that, you know, we're opposed to, or the Farnham Society is opposed to development per se, because that surely isn't a sustainable proposition. But what about shaping the future? You mentioned Brightwells. That is going to be a dominant future landmark of Farnham. But what's our general approach to shaping the future? I must stop here. My coffee has arrived. How about that?
Well, you're well looked after.
Oh, there we are. There we are. Thank you. So, yeah, shaping the future.
Yeah, well, it's the small things which add up cumulatively. As I said earlier, we spend a lot of time looking at consultative documents, and some of them get to the point where they have real impact. Now, if I take something like the neighbourhood plan and the local plan, and most people start yawning and saying, oh, yes, what's all that about? And if they start to read it, they might say, oh, well, you know, not too interested in this. But we have to be interested in it because we know that up the road, whatever those regulations say is going to impact on the local community. And we have examples of planning applications which have been turned down on the basis of the wording of the neighbourhood plan. So it's important that we do that and also look into the future. We would like to see development. In fact, one of my personal annoyances is that planning permission is given to developers where a part of the deal is that they will build housing which will be available at lower costs, either to buy or to rent. And I think rent is becoming more important. And yet, strangely enough, once they have the planning application, they dump all that. They say, oh, we can't make enough profit out of this, so we have to dump the affordable housing. And sadly, often planning authorities tend to give way on that point. And that annoys me. So for the future, what I would like to see is stronger regulations that prevent developers suddenly dumping affordable housing. Because as I look at my children and grandchildren now, how are they going to have accommodation, let alone buying a house? Where are they going to live? Will they be able to rent something? So
do you not think that actually what we're seeing very recently is a move, at least it's an encouragement, and we're talking shaping the future here, where you've got across the piece, you've got the High Street Task Force. They put 675 million behind nationally, behind a high street fund. You've got just recently the new National Office for Place and the Build Beautiful design intending to return more influence to local communities. These sound a lot like the things that, you know, the Farnham Society across its years has been arguing for. And then, of course, more locally, you've got the Farnham Infrastructure Plan to deal with some of the immediate pressures, whether it's, you know, traffic or whether it's speed limits, HGVs. So aren't there now moves that we would welcome and get behind and really support that are coming through nationally?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for years we've been arguing the points you just made. Build beautiful. Why build cheap and shoddy? You can build very attractive, in the old terms, council estates. There are examples around the country, very attractive developments. They're not big palatial buildings, but they're very nice accommodation for people who wish to live or have to live within a budget. So these things are so important, and we've worked hard over the years to build into all the regulations I've been talking about quality. Where are you going to build? Why doesn't the local community have some say in where to build? Because developers will always go to the expensive areas, easy areas, open fields normally. They don't want to deal on grey sites. So
but a lot of this building, as you have referred to, is for, if you like, people at a different stage of their life or career than we've been discussing. You know, you've mentioned children and grandchildren. Does the society appeal across the age spectrum, or is it, as I've heard, a society for people, you know, who are comfortably well off and at a later stage in their career and life? Where do you see an ability to encourage, even if we should, a younger membership?
It is a problem. I think it comes back to the fact that the world's changed since, you know, I started earning money to exist. It's changed because pressure is remorseless on people nowadays. Jobs are under threats. You've got emails all the time going backwards and forwards. People are rushing around, working hard, protecting their own positions, protecting their own jobs. The days have gone when you joined a company and our whole life was with a company. Your job's under threat all the time. It could be redundancies, no fault of your own. So people are concentrating on their own careers and work. They have to. They're working long hours and they don't have the time to think too much about what we're discussing. I wish they would, and it's down to us to try to get it. We have tried through parent-teachers associations, for instance, to try to encourage, and we're going to develop this in the future, better links with schools. Do you think there's a good way to start? Also the UCA, what a gem that is in the middle.
Well, I was going to mention the UCA because one of the characteristics of Farnham is the very successful University of the Creative Arts. That plays to the younger demographic, yet we seem to have very little linkage with the UCA. And indeed, Farnham doesn't feel like a university town, does it? Is there something we should do to encourage that? Or is that getting the balance wrong?
Well, I think it's true. I'm a member of another organisation, and we have links with the UCA and welcome all the new students once a year at a get-together where there's free drinks, so that tends to attract the younger element very quickly.
Good element,
Yeah.
good membership benefit.
Yeah, so perhaps we should do something similar. But the UCA, it fascinates me because it doesn't seem to get the town publicity which it gets internationally. Internationally, they're so well known, and they're brilliant in areas like animation and filming and textile. You name it, they're into everything in design. Well, perhaps we should be able to use them for designing a few houses and developments and thoughts and ideas, lampposts and all sorts of things.
Is that down to them, or is that down to us that we've not positioned ourselves as welcoming that sort of diversity across the age range? Or I suspect you're going to say, well, we've tried, but it's a question worth asking.
Yeah, well, we have tried, but I'm afraid we didn't help much when new student accommodation was being built, and we didn't think it was too well designed. And we still think that. But so we tended to put in objections to it, so that didn't endear us perhaps to the authorities in the UCA. But the new chancellor, I think she's been there 2 or 3 years now, but I think we should start trying much harder to build that link, and so should the town, because the town and gown never mix, the old story. And I'm afraid that applies to Farnham. It doesn't seem that there is a link somehow between the community.
But there's a direct link, Alan, isn't there, between the UCA and the Farnham Society itself? Wasn't one of the, and this is where I think I got the William mixed up, wasn't actually the founder of the Farnham Arts College a founder, or certainly very influential in the creation of the Farnham Society?
Yes. Harold Faulkner was very heavily involved.
Right.
And there is a strong link. I mean, there are so many links to this. A number of quite famous names in the history of Farnham were linked to what is now the UCA. So I think we have been a bit remiss. We should try harder, I think, because it's up to us. We're always here. Students come and go.
So our message isn't that we're just a society for a certain demographic, but our intention, our ambition is to try and widen that as a society for all, even though that can sometimes seem a pretty hard road. We've talked a lot about the built environment, but this is also about green spaces. And one of the things that I'm keen on, and that's why I mentioned some of those personalities, is there are terrific stories of Farnham notables, if I can put it that way. You mentioned the Chancellor, the Vice Chancellor of the UCA, a world-renowned, I think, artist. But, you know, we've got sports people from Johnny Wilkinson to Graham Thorpe. Why don't we feature more about the stories of the people of Farnham that bring Farnham to life and give it some of its heritage?
Yeah, I do agree. We probably in the past have been too geared towards building and heritage, thinking about the past and obviously looking to the future in terms of buildings and not so much about people. I think we're changed over the last few years. We begin to realise that buildings are there for people. And if you get the right people in the right buildings, you get a very dynamic community. So, yeah, I think we should be looking more closely at people. Sir John Vintner, for instance, John Brownlow, he's an amazing man. I mean, there he was, one of the first members of the SAS, parachuted into Italy, was on the run for about 3 or 4 months from the Germans who were hunting him down in the mountains, escapes, gets back to the British lines, ends up into Farnham, and becomes a hell of a character here. I mean, So yes, you're right. I think we should do more. But green spaces, I can just pick that up. Yes, we are very conscious of protecting green spaces. Initially, open fields, again, building driven, I suppose. But more recently, I mean, one of the things we do each year is the Heritage Open Day, which is a very big operation. A lot of people think it's run by the Farnham Town Council, but it's actually run by the Farnham Society. And it is an amazing a few days of free access to buildings, some of which are not normally available to the public to go in. But of course, last year, with coronavirus, we could hardly herd people into buildings. So I thought rather cleverly, all sorts of arrangements were made outside for people to go. And we actually produced a booklet showing, I think it was somewhere around about 40 different gardens, parks, open spaces which people could go to and just walk around at their leisure, not just at the Hod's weekends. And that's gone down very well. And also at the moment, again, thinking for the Hod's arrangements this year, again, it's got to be outside. And all sorts are going on at the moment. Footpaths, for instance. Footpaths are disappearing. There's something like 40,000 footpaths have disappeared off maps over the last few years. Again, you wonder why. It could be something to do with someone wanting to build on the footpath, for instance. But whatever, that is something that could be taken as a theme. Pub signs. I'm interested in pub signs, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But the history of pub signs is fascinating. Look into that. There's so many things that could be done of historical interest.
Well, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to ask you this question to do this very briefly. Just paint a picture for the Farnham Society, vibrant, sustaining. What's it doing, and what does it look like in 5 years' time from now?
You're making me feel tired thinking about this. Vibrant, sustaining. Yeah, well, I hope we are going to be that way. I think it's a higher profile is what we want. You've touched on younger people becoming involved. There's an example. I mean, we really should be pushing hard for that. And I also think a wider membership, corporate membership, that has been suggested recently. There are other civic societies who do this. We've tended to turn our face against it in the past, I think primarily because it is felt that they might have influence on any decision-making process. Well, that can't happen because the corporate membership would be geared to people who have the same objectives that we have. We're hardly likely to ask Taylor Woodrow, for instance, to become a corporate member, but there are plenty of others. As one of my older colleagues said, well, perhaps funeral directors might be quite interested. So there's another reason we should get a younger demographic into the Farnham Society. So corporate membership, I think, is an area. Younger membership we've touched on. Dealing with people, I think we should be pushing harder for economic growth in Farnham. There are economic corridors which the government sponsor, where you get enormous support from the government with loans. We're not in any economic corridor, but why not? Why can't we? Up to now, local politicians think Waverley or think Surrey. Well, an economic corridor down to the south coast, we should be part of that. So that's something I can see the Farnham Society becoming involved in. And architectural awards, school awards, all these sort of things which draw public in and give us a stronger image representing the whole of Farnham.
So I'm going to end on this and ask you for, a couple of sentences on why should I join the Farnham Society?
Just look around you, I would say. Just look around what you have inherited, and it's not there by accident. It's there because our predecessors have really worked hard to preserve what is good in Farnham. The rubbish is gone. No one fights for rubbish, it's gone. But if you're not careful, rubbish is inserted. So if you join the Farnham Society for £1 a year, £1 a month, you're getting a pretty good deal. You've got somebody watching all the time what's going on and representing your interests, protecting your interests and local interests, because Waverley is a planning authority, or Surrey is a planning authority. The councillors who vote, most of them don't come to Farnham. Waverley is a peculiar geographical area. So you get councillors voting for things here which only we know are wrong. So it's up to us to represent those things.
To represent those things, a reason for membership and a reason for sustainability. Alan, thank you very much for your time this morning. I'm sure we can do more of this at a future date. There's more to say, I know. But on that, thank you. And I'll pass back to Michelle. Michelle.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan and Richard. That was very, very interesting. I've learned a few things there myself, and as a member of nearly 10 years, that's saying something. So thank you very much for that. Look, I, like you, care about Farnham's future and past. And yes, the town has challenges, but hopefully with residents' voices, these can easily be turned around into opportunities. Farnham craft town status gives, I think, Farnham a significant opportunity to craft our town into a destination. So let us be more BIMBY, which is beauty in our backyard, rather than NIMBY, not in my backyard. And please engage and Google the Farnham Society. Join us to help make Farnham a better place that residents can be proud of and give visitors a pleasant and engaging experience. Thank you very much.